Thank you very much, Chair. Good to see my friends from Fiscal Group. I want to revisit the questioning you might have seen this morning to the Secretary about the variation between PFO and MyFO in the medium term. Can you help me on a dollar figure of that variation in the underlying cash balance?
Senator, Damien White, Deputy Secretary, Fiscal Group. As the Secretary said this morning, we consider the medium-term numbers and the longer-term numbers when we do IGRs is best done as a percent of GDP, because as nominal numbers grow over time, the comparison of those nominal numbers becomes less useful. Numbers 10 and 15 years into the future do not mean the same thing as numbers now. That is the way we've shown those numbers in history whenever we've done any numbers past the forward estimate, Senator.
2029 is not 10 or 15 years into the future.
No, but the end of the forward estimate, end of the medium-term period is another about 10 or 12 years into the future, Senator. And even then, I mean, GDP grows by like 5 or 6% a year. It quickly becomes 20, 30, 40, 50% bigger than it is now. And numbers that you have in nominal terms over those periods of time do not mean the same thing.
So are you saying that Treasury does not have it in dollar terms?
No, Senator. In fact, to do the calculation, we need the numbers. We cannot do a proportion of GDP unless we have a numerator and a denominator.
Indeed.
But we do not show them in the budget papers, and we have not put them out in the public domain because of the reasons I've said.
Sure. Well, I'm still insisting that you tell me because I would like to know what it is. And it not being your preference or your practice is not a valid reason for not answering. So what is the dollar figure?
He's answered your question.
No, he hasn't. He hasn't told me what the dollar figure is.
Well, he's explained the approach Treasury takes. It has always been that way, and they take that approach for the reasons that Mr White has explained.
Yes, thank you.
So,
caveat acknowledged.
Like, he's answered your question. It might not be to your
sorry,
satisfaction, Senator Patterson, but he has answered your question.
No, I'm sorry, Minister. When I ask for a number which Treasury knows but doesn't say, that is not answering the question.
You cannot order a particular answer, Senator Patterson. Treasury have answered the question.
Mr White, what is the number?
As I've said, Senator, we put the numbers in the public domain as the percent of GDP in a very transparent way, including putting numbers for GDP up on our website. It allows people to make calculations like are in the public domain, but we do not put them there like that as nominal dollars.
Yes, so the figure we have in the public domain is $57 billion, and the reason why we have that figure is because those GDP figures are rounded to the nearest 0.1 decimal point. So it's close, but it's probably not exactly what the number is, and I think it's in the public interest to know exactly what the number is, and you know what the number is, you have the number, and it not being your usual practice or not your preference is not a valid reason to not answer a question.
Not usual practice. It is not the practice.
Even that is not a sufficient answer. Treasury has information. If it doesn't wish to provide that information, it would have to make a public interest immunity claim. And, Minister, you know well that a public interest immunity claim that this is not the practice of Treasury is not going to stack up. The Senate would never accept that. So, Mr White, what is the number? You know what the number is.
Senator, you're right. We have the numbers, but this is just not the way that it's been done. And we do not think that putting the numbers for nominal dollars in the public domain is the most helpful way of showing these things.
I appreciate that that's your view. I respect and understand that view. But your belief that it is not the most helpful way is not a valid reason for failing to answer a question in Senate estimates. You've admitted you know the number. I've asked you the number. You need to say what the number is.
No, he doesn't need to say. He can answer your questions in the way the witness chooses to, Senator Patterson.
No, Minister. The only acceptable grounds for refusing to answer a question is a public interest immunity claim. Is Treasury seriously making a public interest immunity claim over a number that it knows because it thinks it's not helpful?
Treasury reports the medium-term outlook in the graphs in the mid-year economic update. We've been through that this morning. That is how Treasury explains their thinking on medium-term outlook.
Yes, and that's very interesting, but still not a valid reason for information Treasury holds being withheld from the public. So again, I'll ask Mr White, can you please tell me what the number is in dollar terms?
Senator, we have, so when we do our numbers, what we've put in the budget is in the forward estimates, we show what has happened what has happened to those numbers in very large amount of detail, and we put those in nominal numbers, and that shows that since last budget and PFO, the budget has improved by about $8 or so billion over the forward estimates that were in the MyEFO, and about $15 or $16 billion in the FBO before that. In the medium term, we show that it's about that the underlying cash balances are about 0.2% of GDP per year on average, so a relatively small amount, which, as we talked about this morning, is why we say that we think that this is broadly in line with the numbers. And yes, and people can go out and see what we put there. But if you want the numbers, I will get Ms Brown to talk to you about the number.
Yes, please. Thank you, Ms Brown.
See if I have the... No, so Philippa Brown, First Assistant Secretary, Budget Policy Division. The number is $54 billion.
Thank you, Ms Brown. I'm not sure why we just had to spend 7 or 8 minutes to finally acknowledge that the deterioration in the underlying cash balance in the medium term is $54 billion. The $57 billion guesstimate was already out there in the media. We now learn it's $3 billion less, $54 billion. Minister, why was that whole charade necessary?
Senator Patterson. Well, I think Treasury's been clear about the way they report and have, including under your government, the medium-term forecasts. And that, based on the evidence I've heard today and from the Secretary, would have been their preference because they think it gives a better picture of their view of the medium-term outlook. Now, you are running, your political arguments here and have chosen to have a different view to that. You've got the number. It's not the way Treasury prefer to explain their medium-term forecasts, but, and I back Treasury on that, so there's a difference of opinion.
Minister, this is information that Treasury holds which it has no valid reason to refuse, and we just went through a charade of 7 or 8 minutes after going through a charade of 15 minutes this morning with the Secretary.
Yeah.
Senator O'Neill, that's completely out of order. Senator O'Neill, you don't have to call. Chair, can I ask you to bring Senator O'Neill to order?
From a opinion, maybe $142 billion if you look at the PO document.
Just let Senator Patterson finish his questions, please.
$142 billion you would have been.
Okay.
I know the Treasurer's Office is texting you, asking you to jump in, run interference to protect the government.
Don't flatter yourself, Senator Patterson.
We've all been there. We've all been there, Senator O'Neill. I know.
I don't think anyone's doing anything.
We've all been there.
Of that order.
I've been a government backbencher as well. I know what that's like.
Well, thank you for sharing the wisdom with us. But, you're distorting the truth of what was reported this morning.
Okay. Let's get Senator O'Neill, if you could just keep your opinions to yourself.
Thanks, Chair. I think what this shows is, for some strange reason, extreme sensitivity on part of the government about this figure.
No,
anyway, we've got the number now.
It's about standard budget reporting, actually, Senator Patterson. Okay. That's what it's about. Okay.
I think anyone watching will come to a different conclusion. But anyway, we've got the number now, $54 billion. To what extent is that $54 billion figure made up of changes to revenue forecasts, and what extent is it made up to changes of expenses forecasts?
Senator, you can see we put the charts in the budget papers in the MyEFO as the Secretary was talking about this morning. So charts 3.5 and 3.6. So in those charts you can see that for receipts start the medium term roughly about the same level as in the PFO, and they decline slightly below the PFO line. So by the end of the medium term on the receipt side, receipts are lower than we assumed at PFO.
By how much?
I'll come to that in a second, Senator. On the payment side, you can see that in the first couple of years of the medium term, payments are a little bit higher, or there's a bit of a gap between the PFO and the MyEFO ones, with MyEFOs being a bit higher. But after the first couple of years, those two lines are very close together. So if we're talking about that, so at the end of the medium term, Senator, receipts are 0.2% of GDP below what they were at PFO, and payments are the same level as they were at PFO.
That's the end point.
That's the end point, yes.
What is the cumulative difference on both the payment side and the receipt side?
So the cumulative difference is, so as I said, at the beginning, payments make up the most part of the change between PFO and MyEFO, but by the end, it's receipts. Over the full period, payments are a bit more than receipts.
Okay. What do you have it in dollar terms?
No, I don't. I only have it in percent of GDP terms, Senator.
Okay. Well, can you estimate the share? What is it? No. 60-40, for example.
It's a bit over 50% for payments. Possibly a bit over 50%.
Yeah.
But not probably. I don't have the numbers, but it's probably not like 70%, right? It's like somewhere in that a bit over 50% range.
Because I asked the PBO on Monday and they said roughly 60-40. Is that in the ballpark?
It might be in the ballpark, but I don't have the number, Senator, but it is a bit over 50.
Okay, how can we get the exact figure? Ms Brown, do you have it?
No, sorry.
How do we get the exact balance of that share?
So as I said, Senator, I don't have the exact balance, but it is a bit over 50. The PBO said 60-40. That is probably going to be in the ballpark. But
okay.
We don't have a number.
Can you take on notice?
We can take it on notice. That'll be fine.
Number? Thank you. To what extent are the changes in both revenue and payments as a result of variations in forecasts, and to what extent are they a result of policy changes?
So as the Secretary said this morning, Senator, we don't have that. I might just explain how we do the medium term to explain why we don't have it. So in the forward estimates, those numbers are done in a very detailed manner, basically spending program and revenue item by item. And so people put in the exact numbers into Finance's system and they split changes between estimates updates, between estimates variations and measures. We don't do it like that in the medium term. This is a much more aggregated method in the medium term. So what we effectively do is we group up, I'll just use spending as an example, we group up spending into a smallish number of items. So, for example, in the health portfolio, we have like 5 items, right, where there's like hundreds of actual spending programs. And we take the total amount spent on that item in the last year of the forward estimates. So that number will include all the things that have happened over time, all the measures, all the estimates, variations. But say there's like 50 billion being spent on this item, we take the 50 billion. And we then apply a growth rate through the medium term. And that's a growth rate based on the sorts of things that we think will affect that in the medium term. So if it was like a pension payment, for example, we would take the number of people we think are on the pension and the indexation factors and just make that into a growth rate. So we don't have, so basically because we take that aggregate at the end of the forward estimates and just grow it by growth rate, we don't have a measures versus estimates variations. It's just a total amount that we expect to go into the future.
Sure, but I asked the Minister the other day in Finance and she listed a couple of government programs that contributed to this, including the Health and Hospitals Agreement. So you must have that data and you must, and Finance said they provided you that data, and you must have inputted into this calculation. Is that not right? So
that is the general approach we take. We then know that there are some things that governments do or some things that happen that will not fit well in that general approach of a standard growth rate. So, for example, we've talked about the Health and Hospitals deal. We knew that was being done. The government provisioned for that. So when we know things like that that are substantial and we think will make a big difference that does not line up with our standard methodology, we make changes like that, Senator. So yes, we put in numbers for the Health and Hospitals deal. We put in some numbers for the Defence Henderson precinct, but it's only big things like that that differ from the standard methodology, and for the vast bulk of spending, we do not have a split between measures and variations.
Right. Okay. I don't know if you've got the chart that I provided the Secretary
No, I have not,
earlier,
Senator.
but you would know from the data that there's a particularly large, the biggest divergence in the forwards is in the 29-30 financial year. What's the reason for that?
So the main reasons for that, Senator, are those 2 items that are on page 296, I think, of the MyEFO. Is it 296? It might be 294. 294, Senator.
Yep.
Where it says contingency reserve includes provisions to reflect basically the expected increased contribution to the health and disability deal,
right,
and the government's commitment to $12 billion over the next decade for a defence precinct at Henderson. So they are the 2 main items. There are a few other things in there around maybe, and they make up the vast bulk, and there's a few other things, particularly like infrastructure and interest and GST to add a bit, but those 2 things are the main items.
But the Health and Hospitals Agreement is not terminating in
No. I agree, Senator, it's not terminating. So some of the items we have in the medium term are lumpy, so like Defence and Henderson is a thing like that. So some of the infrastructure things are a bit lumpy, and sometimes PDI can be a bit lumpy depending on when there are maturities and how we issue. So there are some lumpy things that fall out over time, which means that gap closes back up as we go further through the medium term.
Okay. Just to conclude, I know the Chair will want to rotate the call in a second. You have said that the majority of the deterioration, a slight majority, a bit over 50%, is due to the payment side, not the receipt side.
Yeah.
What is the Treasurer basing his public comments on when he says it's mostly receipts, not payments?
So we think the Treasurer was talking about the end point of the medium term, Senator, when if you sort of think through the medium term we have things changing, but by the end payments have contributed basically zero to the change since PFO. Receipts are basically the entire change by the end of that period. And if you think of that as sort of the structural change that will go into the future, I think that's what he was.
But that's an absurdity. That's an end point at the end of the mid-year. It's not a mid-term forecast. It's not the cumulative effect.
Agreed, Senator, but it is the point where receipts are, at the end point, receipts are the difference between what we had at PFO and what we have at MyEFO.
Oh, that's a very impressive effort at
the impact at the end
translating the Treasurer's
term is the best
error.
indicator of what the structural change in the budget position has been, which is the point of those graphs, right?
So, Minister,
and if we'd done based on your election commitments, the budget would have deteriorated $142 billion over the medium term. So
I don't know what that's got to do with anything.
I'm really surprised about how worried you are about this, Senator Patterson. Are you seriously saying that you wouldn't fund Henderson or hospitals?
No, I think
what's it going to be? Hospitals or Henderson?
I think a $54 billion deterioration is worthy of examination, personally, particularly because it occurred in a 6-month period.
That,
in 6
you're not
months.
Doing Henderson if you were in government, or you're not doing hospitals?
Minister, you know this isn't a forum to ask me questions.
Well, are you even going to be the Shadow Finance Minister by the end of the day? Unlikely.
That's a very nice try, Minister. I'm impressed that you've waited for as long as now for that diversion, but it doesn't get you away from the error that the Treasurer made.
Is it Henderson or hospitals?
Do you accept that the Treasurer...
Henderson or
Minister,
hospitals?
it is not your role to ask me questions. Do you accept that the Treasurer got it wrong when he said the majority of the change is due to payments, not receipts, not payments?
The Treasurer... no, the Treasurer's comments are entirely correct, and that's not correct.
That's impressive.
That's your political slant. We get that you're here to make your videos and have your little political point scoring and fight amongst yourselves like we're working genuinely on the defence and health systems of this country. So everyone understands that as a baseline.
We just want the Treasurer to be accurate when he talks about the budget.
Were absolutely correct.
Right. Well,
if you disagree now that chart 3.5 and the way the medium-term projections are being put, including that it's at the end of the medium term that gives you the best assessment of the structural difference across the budget, are you arguing that because it's not a position that you took when you were in government? It's a politically convenient position for someone to take who's spending more time on the internals of their own political machine than actually caring about the future of this country.
Well, I think that's
what we've seen today.
I think, Minister, I'm demonstrating my interest in the budget and have been all day. And you've demonstrated a reluctance to admit
you're organising how to count to 26.
Wrong.
How long does it take to get to 26?
I understand you're embarrassed about the Treasurer's mistake. I would be too.
The Treasurer hasn't made a mistake. Stop. So you can run your political... Look, we get you're a political operative. You're running your political lines. The Treasurer's comments are correct.
Yeah, OK. Thanks, Chair.